I want it to be on record. I knew and was speaking against a massive human trafficking not just illegal aliens coming into our country, not just a border crisis, but something way, way, way bigger than that. A massive modern human tragedy. USAID has been essentially a shell company being used by Democrats to funnel billions of dollars. The way this works is that since you can't get Congress to fund, Black Lives Matter or the invasion of America and all these kinds of things, what they did is they went and they created what is essentially a shell company that has the name of something that sounds very good. That's not what it was at all. They're funneling billions of dollars to this to then support their own perverse agenda, whether it's election rigging, whether it is propaganda, or whether it's the invasion of America. And it's that one that I really want to focus on. Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton. And today I am reporting to you from Cairo, Egypt. Not some Cairo in, some rural part of America, but I mean the Cairo, the one with, if it were daytime, I could pull back these curtains and show you right here the pyramids of Giza. I mean, really, really spectacular. And I got to tell you, I am very excited about this show, not the least of which because I have a lot to report to you on. But I do feel that I've sort of failed you in this regard. I am trying my best when I am, I'm traveling to all these exotic locations as I'm required to try to get hotel rooms or something that really maximizes the location. And some hotels are very accommodating about that, and some of them aren't. And then there are just other factors, like if I were to do it outside, you're going to hear, I think, throughout this episode, horns honking and sirens and all these things. And it's because I'm right in the middle of the hustle and bustle of a major Middle Eastern city. So you're going to hear that in the background. So it'd be impossible to do it outside, to say nothing of getting, Wi-Fi access. And then, of course, it's nighttime here now, so you wouldn't be able to see anything anyway. But it would be great, and I'll try to work some of it in while I'm here. But I sure would love to be able to just have the pyramids, sitting right there, while I'm talking to you. But there's much to report. And most of what I have to report has to do with USAID. That is the United States Agency for International Development. Now let's think about the very name of that organization, USAID. I mean, it sounds like an organization whose purpose is to help developing countries, third world countries, to raise their standard of living, to assist them in some sense in dealing with the realities, the harsh realities of the third world in a way that is also consistent with our own national interests. But as has been revealed, USAID has been essentially a shell company being used by Democrats to funnel billions of dollars. You see, the way this works is that since you can't get Congress to fund, Black Lives Matter or the invasion of America or, BBC and all these kinds of things, what they did, corrupt Democrats did, is they went and they created what is essentially a shell company that has the name of something that sounds very good. And this is what Democrats are very good at, and that is, lying, deceiving, and giving things, a name that sounds innocuous. Planned Parenthood. That sounds fine, right? It's about parenthood. No, it's about not being parents. That's what it's about. It's the opposite of parenthood. It's about the killing of children. But the name wouldn't sound so bad. And then there are things like I've told you, and I've got one sitting right over here. I've told you that the word sustainability is a word that you should be very wary of. Whenever you see that, it's freighted with anti-human meaning. Whatever comes behind it, whether it's population sustainability or economic sustainability or environmental sustainability, whatever it is, it's not anything that you're probably going to like. Well, USAID, again, the name itself suggests that it serves a kind of noble purpose, that this is an organization that's been established by the United States, an agency to assist developing countries in a manner that is consistent with our own national interests. But of course, that's not what it was at all. They're funneling billions of dollars to this to then fund really to support their own perverse agenda, whether it's election rigging, whether it is propaganda, or whether it's the invasion of America. And it's that one that I really want to focus on, because members of the Posse will know that I've been screaming this really for years. And it's just been a matter of trying to get that information into the right hands. I've spoken to a senator in regards to this, but I'm not sure that he fully understood the import of what it was that I was trying to communicate to him. And then, of course, this past week, I felt very vindicated because the President of the United States saw me in an interview on Steve Bannon's War Room, and he texted Bannon and said, wow, what this Taunton guy has uncovered is explosive and very important. But I'm getting ahead of myself now. So let me back up and tell you a little bit about what this is all about. Now, you all know that USAID is a corrupt organization. I mean, that's everywhere, right? I mean, Musk has been talking about this and Trump has been talking about this. But until recently, it seemed to me that they really only knew they were really only seeing the the iceberg. Iceberg reveals 1/9 of its total mass, above water. And it was that 1/9 of USAID's corruption that they were seeing. And that was primarily in funding propaganda campaigns all over the world, mostly anti-Trump and really anti-American and perverse sexual agenda propaganda that was being funded. But I knew that it was much, much bigger than that. I knew that that they were the ones who were funding the invasion of the United States, and they were doing it by giving money. U.S. taxpayer money is given to USAID, and then USAID gives that money to different organizations for different purposes. But some of them, say Catholic Charities and the IOM, the International Organization for Migration, alternately called OIM, the Organization for International Migration, which is a United Nations organization. They were the ones who were running this. So backing up still further, I had decided, probably around 2019, that it really seemed to me that no one was really paying attention or asking the question about why people were invading the United States. Why were millions of South and Central Americans coming to our border? What was going on? Well, CNN reported very deceptively, probably with money that was given to them by USAID, but they reported that it was due to climate change, which any sensible person knows that's, utter and complete nonsense. That's not at all the case. That's not what was going on. And so I decided, rather than, where everyone was really focused on the border, I wanted to focus on what's going on south of the border, what's happening there to drive millions of people to the United States border. And what I discovered when I first went down there in 2019, and the Posse will know we've talked about this, repeatedly, but I'm really wanting to give you sort of the global vision of all this and how it relates to USAID. The Posse will know that I started going down there really quite regularly. I probably have been to South and Central America, Mexico City, 12 to 15 times over the course of the last 5 years. Some of those trips have been very successful. Some of them you kind of come back and feel like, I didn't really accomplish anything, or, didn't discover anything, different than what I already knew. But I stayed with it, and I stayed the course. And what I was witnessing was incredible, and that's because when I first started going down, which again was about 2019, until just after the election of Donald Trump, what I was seeing was changing very rapidly. So, towards the end of Trump's first term, it was very ad hoc. A lot of people were coming to the United States border, but it wasn't organized particularly well. What people were doing, the illegals, and I say illegals because they're not just illegals in the United States. These people are illegal in every country they're passing through other than their country of origin. And that's important to understand this when we were talking about this particular issue. So I was noticing that these illegals, what they were doing is they had established Facebook groups in order to assist one another and to ask each other, questions. And so it was starting to become a little bit more organized as, someone would say, hey, this is a place where you can stop and they'll give you water. And this is a place where they will help you, getting a boat pass, a ferry pass over to Darien Gap, or this is a place where you can sleep, or this is where you can buy cheap food, or hey, this is the route we recommend that you go through Darien, or whatever. So people were assisting each other in this kind of way. But again, it was very ad hoc. But then, I have to say, I kind of like giving, I kind of like doing ideas have consequences from this very comfortable chair in my hotel room. Anyway, once Biden became president, that started changing, and it started changing rapidly, and in a way where it was going from being a very ad hoc, a very disorganized mess of people trying to get to the United States, to suddenly the numbers were increasing, and they were increasing hugely. We know, I mean, our own government, would acknowledge this, but I have it from other sources. Centerfront, for instance, the Panamanian Border Patrol showed me their data, which was, astronomical, of the numbers of people that they were seeing increasing every year, right up to Biden's last year in office. And of course, I was witnessing it because I was down there so often, and I was down there to engage with these groups to see what they were doing. So suddenly, what had begun with people who were trying to help each other to get to the United States border through Facebook groups and that kind of thing, it was suddenly becoming much bigger, as I've just said. And then secondly, it was becoming far more organized. And now you were seeing more agencies that were involved, government agencies that were involved. And they weren't there to stem the tide. If you were to look up, USAID's webpage, which probably was taken down by Doge, by Musk's team of teenagers, has been down since last Saturday. So it'll be 2 Saturdays ago by the time this particular episode airs, but you can still find it on Time Machine, and you can find plenty of articles about USAID if you type it in, USAID and immigration. All of the articles that deal with USAID that I've seen anyway, they're all ones talking about how they're trying to stem the tide of immigration. This was just a window front for a very corrupt organized crime group, which is really what they were. So they were, again, trying to give the impression that they were what they were supposed to be, United States Agency for International Development, and trying to develop these countries in such a way that people wouldn't, make a run for our border. But the reality was that's not at all what they were doing. And I began blowing the whistle on this. And so I was taking pictures and doing video that some of you saw when you saw, I think I did 2 documentaries on immigration, where I'm standing in front of, their banner, USAID. And then, of course, you see the OIM or IOM logo as well. You see both of them, all over the place. And anytime you see OIM or IOM, you need to know that that's the same as USAID because they're being funded by USAID. It's just that they're a kind of subsidiary. They're a United Nations organization, but a United Nations organization that was being paid for with U.S. Tax dollars. And you see, what they were doing is instead of stemming the tide of immigration, of illegals storming our border, they were facilitating it. They were organizing it. They were making it much easier. So they were providing things like illegal flights into the United States, which I saw and reported that these were taking place from South America. They were seeking specific groups, certain nationalities, wasn't just any nationality that they were flying into the United States. They were just specific ones that the United States government had instructed the people at IOM or immigration offices in such places as, say, Colombia, to bring these specific nationalities in the United States. And they were facilitating flights that even the people themselves, like the Colombians who work for Colombian immigration, they didn't know where those flights were going in the United States. They weren't told that. They weren't flights that even themselves, some of them very much want to immigrate to the United States. They weren't allowed to get on those planes. They're saying, nope, we're not looking for you. We're looking for Venezuelans. We're looking for Haitians. We're taking Afghans and a couple of other nationalities. But for instance, Colombians, it wasn't one that was very high on their priority list. So this is what was going on. And so I was screaming this. I was trying to make people aware. You're wondering who is funding all this. It's USAID who is doing this. They're the ones who are doing it, meaning United States tax dollars are being used for this. Now, I've also argued all along that I think, and I'm hoping that eventually DOJ is going to get around to this too, but I think that USAID is just really the tip of the iceberg. I think that it's one of two, I think there are others, but it's one of two major money laundering operations they've had going on. So you've had USAID, and the other one, I believe, I can't prove this, a Pulitzer Prize is waiting some intrepid reporter with serious finance and accounting background, which I do not have, to ferret this out. But I think Ukraine is that other arm where billions of dollars. Now, have you noticed that Zelensky, since Trump has come into office, Zelensky is suddenly becoming state witness for the prosecution. He is turning against the left. Have you picked up on this? That just in the last week, Zelensky has said $100 billion of $177 billion worth of aid we were supposed to get, we never saw. It was siphoned off before it reached us by some, nefarious American interests. $100 billion. So Zelensky wasn't saying this when Biden was in office, but now that Trump is in office, he suddenly is becoming, star witness for the Trump administration against corrupt Democrats. And that's because he realizes, first of all, that he would have, probably faced assassination had he said such a thing while Biden was still in office. And secondly, he's hoping that this Trump administration is going to treat him pretty kindly, being well aware of his corruption. So he's probably going to expect some kind of quid pro quo. Regardless, I think that what he's saying is true. Probably more than $100 billion has disappeared. Now, I don't think all of that is going into the pockets of people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Liz Cheney's. I think that it's going to a variety of places, and one of them is to fund Democrats and their globalist allies' nefarious causes, and primarily causes that are targeting the United States, such as illegal immigration. So this is the stuff I've been talking about. And again, I want to drive home to you that when I first started going down, and then It was recently. I was just in Mexico City just, I don't know what, 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, I've been staying on top of this consistently. And I haven't just been in Mexico. I've been in Panama. I've been in Darien. I've been in Colombia, cartel country in Colombia, along the Venezuelan border, Brazil, Peru. I've been a variety, Costa Rica, a variety of countries ferreting this out for quite some time, always hoping that it was going to get noticed. And, my wife, Lori, she had asked me, she wasn't saying that it wasn't worth it. She was just encouraging me to think about it, because before my last trip down, she said, do you really think it's water, by the way. It's not vodka. Christopher Hitchens, when we used to do our debates together, he would have Evian. He loved Evian water. That was his preferred water, but he sometimes would put vodka in just to give the appearance he was drinking water. But that's not what I'm doing. Don't drink the water of the third world. Drink bottled water, and this is bottled water. Anyway, she asked me, do you think it's really worth all the time and energy and money and risk? I'm not exaggerating when I say that I've risked my life multiple times in ferreting out this information. Now, was I doing it just because I wanted to be some kind of intrepid reporter? No, that wasn't my primary reason in doing it. I was doing it because I have felt very passionately that this issue is one of the unreported human rights catastrophes of our time. You see, this is a new trail of tears. Setting aside the nefarious elements among many of these migrants, among many of these illegals, criminals and cartels and, say, paramilitary types who are being sent into the United States, millions of these people have been coming to the United States or trying to come to the United States because Democrats invited them. I mean, they did. They invited them to come to the United States. They encouraged them to come to the United States, and they didn't care what happened to them between point A, their country of origin, and Z, the United States border. They didn't care what happened to them. And at least 250,000, 500,000 children have just disappeared into thin air. There's no Colombo. There's no Monk. There's no NCIS, that's coming looking for these people. They're just gone, probably forever. Many of them dead, perhaps most of them dead. And it's like nobody cares. And that is because the rhetoric surrounding immigration hasn't been particularly useful. Democrats have pretended that they love these people when they didn't. They're just using them for their own nefarious political motivations to flip blue states into red states. But then because they like them, the tendency is when your enemy, such a wicked enemy as we have in the United States and in globalists, that when your enemy likes something that you're going to hate it. So because they were, using rhetoric that made them sound like they were so pro-migrant, pro-illegal aliens, it made conservatives ramp up their rhetoric, against these people. So I want to be clear. I've said this multiple times, and there'll probably be somebody who will go into the comments who hasn't listened to this episode. They will just, maybe read the banner or description or something and react, which I hate because it's annoying when people, say don't read your book and then decide to go and write a review on it. Same with the podcast. Two things can be true at once and are true at once here. You can have a strong immigration policy, push for a strong immigration policy, and indeed for mass deportation of illegals into our country, and still feel compassion for these people who have been invited into the United States and who are being victimized by everybody along the way. Cartels, indigenous peoples, criminals of every sort, you name it. It's happening. Kidnappers, human traffickers, it's all happening. I want our border defended with lethal force. I want machine guns on those walls. I want walls, but I want machine guns on them. I want them defended with a lethal force. I want a sensible immigration policy, but I also feel compassion for these people who, again, are part of one of the largest human trafficking operations in history run with your tax dollars. There should be people who will go to jail for this. President Trump said some people would. But anyway, when all the USAID stuff broke just a few days ago, or, maybe it's more than a few days ago, a week or so ago, I thought, here's my chance. Here's a chance to get this new story out. Now, I'm on a lot of different shows as a guest, but sometimes the immigration issue, any little details or the smoking gun that you might have in a particular interview or a particular article or story, sometimes it's just missed because people aren't necessarily reading it, or because there's a plethora of other articles on immigration, and therefore, you're getting lost in all that. But when I saw what was happening with USAID, and that Musk with Doge was shutting it down and was uncovering a lot of corruption, all the corruption that they were uncovering still dealt with, in my mind, really what was the tip of the iceberg. What they were dealing with, what they were talking about chiefly, was their use of American taxpayer money, USAID using American taxpayer money to fund news agencies, to fund, controlled opposition, like, say, Russell Moore at Christianity Today. They were receiving millions of dollars. Fund BBC, Politico, that's one that's come out. This was where all the focus was. And I got up and I thought, you know what? They're missing the big story here. And the big story is that USAID was funding the invasion of America. So I did a variety of talk shows again in order to to get to this issue, and I texted Steve Bannon and said, hey, I'd love to come on your show and discuss this. And I sent him a few pictures of banners and so forth. Imagine being this arrogant. Not Bannon. Imagine being so arrogant that the left, USAID, they're running this massive human trafficking op, and they were stamping everything with their logo. So that I was just going along, taking pictures, so that on the beaches in Nico Clee, if you didn't watch the documentary, is deep in cartel territory in Colombia. It's in Western Colombia. It is formerly a little resort town. It's, 10 years ago, it was a, kind of the Fort Lauderdale of Colombia. Now, or at least until recently, until Trump's election, that place was just bursting at the seams with illegals from all over South America, and also with illegals from other parts of the world, like, for instance, Haitians, Indians, Chinese, and Afghans. I saw them all in Nico Clee. And you may be going, why would they go there? What would be the point of that? Well, the reason is because, you would think if you're from Haiti or you're from Afghanistan or something, and you're looking at a map and you're trying to get into the United States illegally, and you're not being flown, straight into the United States somewhere, you would think, well, I'm going to fly as close to the U.S. border as I can. I'm going to fly into North Mexico, but they can't do that. And the reason they can't do that is because every country north of the Darien Gap, and again, the Darien Gap is that jungle that sits like a cork on top of South America, through which there is no road. There are pathways, but there's no road. And I've heard people talk about, I did an interview the other day with somebody who said, there's a big bridge and it's being built through there. It's not true. That's not happening. Colombians don't want it. Panamanians, the Colombians might want it. Panamanians definitely do not want it. And anyway, every country north of the Darien Gap straight up to Mexico requires a proper visa. Now, as recent as maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, Nicaragua didn't. So some of them were flying into Nicaragua. Thus, they didn't have to go through the Darien Gap because they can fly north of it. But by a proper visa, if you don't understand what I mean by visa, I'm talking about where you have to, in addition to your passport, you have to have government-specific approval that gives you something like a letter, a ticket, stating that you can come in, and where you apply for it, in which you answer, a series of questions. You list your name and your birth date and your date of arrival, your date of departure, your purpose for being there, and then some other details, about yourself, where you're staying, those kinds of things. Well, every country north of the Darien Gap required a proper visa, meaning you had to mail in your passport weeks, months in advance of travel, and you would wait for a few weeks while that country vetted you and then sent your passport back with a visa stamped inside of it. Some countries south of Darien have what's called visa upon arrival. Now, visa upon arrival is a whole different deal. And I flew into into Egypt, into Cairo. I had no visa, but I have to have a visa. And you say, well, how are you going to get in if you didn't apply for it months in advance? And that's because Egypt has something called visa upon arrival, where you just go to a ticket counter and you pay them $25 and they give you a visa, a little ticket that goes with your passport, and then the immigration officer, unpeels it and then sticks it in your passport and stamps it, and boom, away you go. So you don't have to bother with it, months in advance. Well, you see, Colombia has visa upon arrival, and Colombia is the country that if you're going on foot through the Darien Gap, you have to go through Colombia. I hope I'm not getting too in the weeds here. I hope you're able to track with me, but these are all things that I've been, dealing with for the past several years. So they had to go south of the Darien Gap. Particularly once Nicaragua got rid of visa upon arrival, they had to go south of the Darien Gap, and that meant they had to go through the treacherous, Darien Gap. Well, then what you would see there. Excuse me, I just had a nice burger. I haven't had a burger in ages. What you would see is the cartels charging these people to load them on ferries and take them across the Gulf to the jumping off point of the Darien Gap, which is where they were going. And they were charging them. But get this. Now, Bannon asks me this in the interview, and it was a great question. I was glad that he did. He said something to the effect of, Larry, is USAID, are they funding the cartels? And I told him, I don't think they're funding the cartels, but they're working hand in hand with the cartels. Meaning that, again, imagine the arrogance of this, right on the very beaches where people are being loaded onto Zodiacs, these boats that take them across to the Darien Gap, right there on those beaches, you would see banners that say USAID, IOM, International Office of Migration. You would see their swag all over the place. And something kind of incredible happened. Some of you may recall me telling you this, but I was observing this, and I've been talking about this. I've been talking about this for more than a year, about what USAID was doing. It's just that nobody seems to really, be listening or paying attention or understanding the import of it. Just how corrupt USAID was. And I want to be clear, I didn't know how corrupt USAID was. I knew that USAID was funding. I was seeing if Musk and Trump were seeing that portion of the iceberg that was above the water and not what was below the water, I was seeing what was below the water and not what was above it. So we were all seeing different aspects of U.S. USAID and what they were doing. But I was seeing the human trafficking side of it. They were seeing the propaganda wing of the whole thing. So they're seeing that USAID, is funneling billions of dollars into a variety. I'm sure there's more yet to come out, as funneling billions of dollars into a variety of what I'll call shell companies to fund nefarious purposes. Things like, sex operations, for children, pushing, transgender, bullshit on people. I mean, this was the kind of stuff that USAID was doing. This is what was happening and probably is still happening, but is slowly being strangled by this administration. Anyway, Bannon asked me, is USAID funding them? And I said, no, I don't think they're funding the cartels, but they are working hand in hand with them. I mean, cooperatively with them, so that the cartels are operating in broad daylight, and there's a truck that says OIM on it and USAID on it, and then there's an immigration officer from the Colombian government standing there facilitating all of this. So they weren't trying to stem the tide of human trafficking, of illegals going from country to country to country. They were funding it, organizing it, and giving it impetus, big time impetus. This is what was happening. So what do you know? I'm on Bannon's show, and I don't know how much of this was on air or off air, because sometimes it's hard to tell, when you're doing a show. I don't know if you're aware of how this works, but these days, so much of it is done by things like Zoom or programs that are fairly similar to that. Almost everybody uses, something different. But you're kind of sitting in a green room, let's say during a commercial break, an electronic green room, and you're waiting to be, if you hear your name mentioned, we're going to go back to Larry Taunton and, in Nico, Colombia, or whatever. I think I was in Switzerland during the interview. And Bannon told us that Trump had texted him and said he was watching the interview, and said that he was grateful. Ben Bergquam was the other person being interviewed, and Trump had said he was grateful for these brave men to go and ferret out this information that he could use. And so I felt very vindicated. I thought, yes, finally, this information is getting into the right hands. And the president said he was grateful to receive that information and he was going to destroy it. Now, there's a couple of destroy USAID. Now, there's a takeaway here that to me is a very interesting takeaway as it relates to this. And that is that the president of the United States, for all of the weight and might and power of the United States government, was not aware, was largely blind about what was happening in the Darien Gap. And it required people like myself and Ben to go in there, and for me to make the link and say, Mr. President, all of this great human tragedy, to say nothing of the tragedy that's causing in the United States itself and the political power that it promises to give Democrats if it isn't stopped, it's all being funded by USAID. And he did not know that. He did not know that. And so that knowledge, he was very pleased to receive that knowledge and say, hey, thank you very much. I'm going to destroy this organization. I'm going to shut this down. I'm thrilled with that for a couple of reasons. While there are many conservatives who will say things like they don't care about, any of these illegals, I don't think that's Donald Trump at all. I think Donald Trump shares my sentiment. I think he wants a border that's protected with lethal force. He wants a proper immigration policy. But I do not think that he is insensitive to the human suffering of many of these people that would lead them to try to come to the United States. Why were they coming to the United States? Because they were fleeing Marxist hellholes. And by the way, I've pointed this out several times on this show. Marxist hellholes that had all fallen to Marxism, countries that have fallen to Marxism in, I don't know, maybe the last 5 years since 2020, all in 2020 like election circumstances. In other words, very nefarious circumstances. Chile, the most stable democracy in America, fell to Marxists. Honduras fell to Marxists. Peru fell to Marxists. Brazil fell to Marxists. Colombia fell to Marxists. Petro, who Trump, bullied, recently, quite properly and hilariously. He's a Marxist terrorist. I mean, a literal Marxist terrorist, formerly a part of what are they called, M19, I think. And he's a murderer. He's the guy who, by the way, also just recently said that he didn't think cocaine was any worse than, alcohol. Clearly, he's trying to turn cocaine into an actual legal drug that will be shipped all over the United States, which is really quite astonishing. But this is the kind of stuff we're seeing. That's to make no mention of Venezuela, where I would say maybe not a majority of these migrants are coming from when we're talking about South America, but I would say a plurality of them are coming there. They're fleeing the Marxist hellhole of Maduro in Venezuela. And I think these things matter to Trump. I think Trump knows that for America's immigration policy to work, for our borders to remain secure and intact, that means we have to have a long-term plan for making these countries livable for these people so that they don't want to leave. And the irony is it means you need an organization like USAID, United States Agency for International Development, but I mean a real one that really does what it's meant to do. And in this case, never did. It was always just a name. It was just a window front for an illegal operation, a psyop against the American people. But I think that it's going to require, I think Trump intends to topple Maduro. I think that he intends to do that. I also think he intends to end the reign of terror of Marxists in Brazil. I think you'll see Bolsonaro, eventually end up as president of that country. But what wasn't reported to the American people, first of all, is USAID played a role in each one of those countries, toppling or thwarting the will of the people in those countries. But also played a role? The CIA. The CIA was playing a role in all of those countries. So this is stuff that I've been witnessing in South America, and I haven't even gotten to. I don't think I've even done a podcast. I've even mentioned I've spent a lot of time on the Panama Canal in the last 5 years. You know who I'm seeing running around down there? The Chinese. They're all over the place. I spent some time speaking to U.S. military contractors working down there, and the information that they relayed to me, mirrored my own experience. And that is, you have to be careful when you go wandering off into the jungle in some of these Central American countries, because the Chinese are active. They're actively mining in many of those countries and also building camps. And it's easy for you to find yourself, running into some sort of perimeter guard in some of these places, and you get shot and dumped into a shallow grave somewhere that nobody sees or hears from you again. I mean, these are the kind of circumstances that we're talking about in some of these countries and some of these places. Now, having said all of that, and thank you, Mr. President, because I was telling you that Lori was asking me, do you think it's worth doing all this? And I want to be clear, Lori wasn't telling me not to do it. She was just saying, your audience doesn't seem terribly interested. And it's true. Anytime I talk about immigration, the view numbers, go down because people generally have not been interested in me talking about that. But I have decided that I feel very passionate about the issue, and whether or not my audience is interested in hearing me talk about it, I'm going to talk about it anyway because it matters, because I want it to be on record that I knew and was speaking against a massive human trafficking op. Not just illegal aliens coming into our country, not just a border crisis, but something way, way, way bigger than that. A massive modern human tragedy. And I always try to speak to you from actual experience. I suspected that was the case, years ago, but I didn't know. And the only way I could know is by going down there and by going into the jungles, by going into the immigration offices, by going into the migrant camps themselves, by following these people where they were going and following them not just in one country, but country after country after country, and engaging with people both high and low. And part of what just really fueled my interest in this issue is because guess where I just was? Some of you know. I was just at the World Economic Forum. So I think it probably surprised Bannon because he just had me on talking about the World Economic Forum. I was saying, Steve, you're talking about USAID. You're not going to find anybody who understands the immigration issue outside of the country, not so much inside the country. I haven't spent as much time seeing what the migrants are doing and what's happening to them inside the country. There are other people who are, been reporting on that, very well. But outside the country, south of the border, I'm your man. I know what's happening, and I've been paying very close attention to it. But again, part of my passion in talking to you about this is because I've been at the World Economic Forum for the last 3 years. And what have I been hearing at the World Economic Forum? People who are themselves insulated from their own policies, pontificating about global migrations and how climate change, is causing all of this. So not willing to address the core problem, which is socialism, which is Marxism. The very policies, the kind of policies, for instance, that they themselves are pushing. They're environmental policies. They're anti-human policies, which makes it impossible for farmers to make a living, for people to eat. I mean, when you're talking to Venezuelans, you're talking about people who can feed their families, couldn't feed themselves. They had no choice but to leave the country. So, again, I'm trying to go upstream to where the ideas are being hatched and being floated, and then going downstream to see how they affect people. And so I've been working at both ends. I'm sitting in Davos listening to all these people, which, by the way, I have to tell you an interesting little story. Some prick that I encountered. If you're a listening guy, I want you to know you are a real prick. I was sitting in a hotel, and I was talking with some friends at a hotel bar. We're just chatting. It's late at night, and they have sitting with them somebody that was already there when I came along. Some guy, an older guy, and his young girlfriend. They're both Americans, I think. And then he began asking me what I did for a living, and I said, "Yeah, I'm a writer and provide political, social commentary." And well, what brings you to Switzerland? And I said, "Well, I was there to cover the World Economic Forum at Davos." And this young woman, she says, "What's that?" And so I started explaining it to her. And her older boyfriend was silent throughout all of this. But we're only talking like a couple of minutes. I was just having fun with them. I wasn't giving a lecture on the World Economic Forum. I was just saying, well, the reason you haven't heard of it is because you have more important things to do with your life, and you're a sensible person. Of course, you wouldn't go to Davos. I mean, why would you do that? Me, I have to go, or at least I feel like I should go. And she says, yeah, but what do they believe? And I said, well, basically, there are people who are pushing hypocritically policies that they themselves don't adhere to. So they fly around in their private jets and their helicopters and all their luxury sedans and get out and then tell you that you should never fly and you should be in a smart car and live in a 15-minute city and that you should eat bugs while they themselves, eat meat. And I said, but they have, there are bigger issues that they're interested in. And she said, like what? And I said, depopulation. And she looked a little surprised. She said, how so? And I said, well, the earth right now has, let's say, 8.5 billion people. on it. They want to reduce it to less than 2. And at that moment, this guy stands up, and I think he's going to bed. He and his wife, or excuse me, his girlfriend are going to bed. And he says, "We are," and I stood up, being a Southern gentleman, and I said, "Going to bed." And I reached to shake his hand, and he goes, "No, we don't believe as you believe, and we want no part of it, and we are moving." And she looked up at him a little surprised, like, because she wasn't hostile and she seemed to be enjoying the conversation. And I took it that they had not been probably dating very long, but he kind of pulled her along and took her over to the bar. And then he, while he sat her on a bar stool while he stood behind her with his arms on either side of her. And then he was lecturing her as if to say, trying to deprogram her from anything that I might have said. I could almost hear him say, "Don't look into his eyes. He'll seduce you." He's convincing you of all these things. He's really a fascist and a Nazi, this kind of stuff. Anyway, the next morning I saw them at breakfast, and I can be a bit of a provocateur, but I decided not to. But I was thinking about walking over when I saw them and saying to her, "Good morning. You can do better than this guy. You should get a real man." But it didn't. I didn't do that. But I thought, isn't this so typical of leftists? I was curious to think, what was it that I said that you disagreed with? You're in favor of depopulation? You're in favor of hypocrisy? You're in favor of, of riding around in, luxury vehicles and private jets and eating steaks and telling everyone that they can't do those things too? Is that what you're in favor of? Anyway, I thought it was so typical of leftists because they don't want to engage you on the ideas themselves. They just want to shut you down. And then they want to sort of browbeat people on their side, in this case, his girlfriend, into accepting his own narrative of things. But anyway, when we're talking about the World Economic Forum and this USAID thing, part of what I've been trying to communicate to you is that they're all linked. All this stuff goes together. It all fits together. It's all incredibly important. And I hope that will become clear to you. I hope you'll be able to see that. Do understand that, again, I'm hoping to get you some good video. Part of what I'm here to do in Cairo is off record. It's not stuff that will probably make a podcast, at least not anytime soon, but it's stuff that I think is incredibly important and part of the work of the mission to which I am called. But there are some things that I'm going to be doing here that you will be able to see and I think will fascinate you no end. But I want to end this episode by saying, please pray for the President of the United States. I'm so grateful to him for his kind words to me, for his expression of gratitude that we had supplied him with something like a scout. We had gone where even his own people had not gone to provide him with information that he needed. And I feel like it vindicates what I just felt a passion that this was something that mattered, and that I hope that eventually the President of the United States or someone would see it. And my work, I like to think of my work a little bit like a scene out of that Tom Clancy book that became a movie, Clear and Present Danger, where, interestingly enough, in this analogy, it also takes place in Colombia, takes place in South America, but where a small band of U.S. Special Forces are down there to put a dent in the drug cartels. And they're looking for the bad guys, and they're searching them out in the jungles and whatnot. And they're not numerous enough to take on the cartels directly. They're a small band of special forces. But what they do is they shine a laser on them from high up in a hill when they find them, and they shine a laser on them. And then hundreds of miles offshore, a destroyer launches a cruise missile, and that cruise missile is directed by that laser. It hits what the laser is pointing at. I think of my work a little bit like that. I think of the Posse a little bit like that. Ideas have consequences. I'm not Fixed Point Foundation, my organization. We're not big enough to destroy something. We are intrepid enough, we are dogged enough, and I think smart enough to search out the truth and then shine a laser on it that enables those people who have the money, who have the resources, who are in positions high in government, in this case, the President of the United States, to say, whoa, I see your laser. And you know what? I'm going to send a cruise missile to destroy that thing. Or sometimes to build it up and to provide help to it. So this is part of the work that we do. This is what I feel a passion about. And that's what we're going to keep doing. So those of you in the Posse, I hope you are encouraged too. Those of you who support the work, my work, you're the people who fund me to go into places like Darien. You know, I had to rent airplanes. I had to find basically like Han Solo, Millennium Falcon, type pilots, bush pilots who would fly me into these dangerous places. And that wasn't cheap, to do that and go to, all these trips down there and following these people in the hotels and all the translators and pilots and all the things that were required was expensive. And I was wondering as recently as just, really just a few days ago, I was wondering, was it really worth all the effort? Because it seems like we never really got the bang for buck that I was hoping we were going to get out of it. And what do you know? We finally did. And let me end by reminding you of this. In your own life, it doesn't have to be that that you do what I do for a living. You could be doing something, and entirely different. But I think if you're going the direction the Lord wants you to go, you're following His lead. Every now and then our spirits begin to flag a little bit, and we start thinking, am I doing the right thing? I see other people who seem to be having a lot of success by not, really following the Lord. Am I doing this the right way? Am I doing something wrong? And I noticed, some years ago, I was teaching the book of Acts repetitively. And whenever you teach a book of the Bible repetitively, it's good for you as a teacher because you're studying it again and again and again. And you're getting, each time you go through it, you see something you missed before. And one of the patterns that began to emerge for me was that the realization that it seemed like everything was going wrong for Paul. He was getting beaten up and he wasn't seeing a lot of converts and he was driven from town to town and, he was arrested and then he was, beaten and then he was arrested again and he appealed to Caesar and he's on his way to see Caesar and the boat, there's a shipwreck. And it seems like nothing is going right for Paul. And 3 different times, either the Lord or an angel of the Lord communicates to Paul directly, maintain your course. Keep going the way you're going. And I developed that into a little sermon I called On Time because it always felt like when nothing is going right, and Paul's spirits must have been flagging, it's always implied that they were, that maybe he's starting to have doubts, that an angel of the Lord himself would appear as if to say, Paul, keep going. We're right on schedule. We're right on schedule. You're right where you're supposed to be. In the day of social media, of clicks, of everything being measured and success being measured by, sales and clicks and media followers and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes I think that we as Christians, we fall into the trap of thinking that that's what translates to actual success or even that you're really doing what the Lord, really wants you to do. If the Apostle Paul had lived in modern day, he would be deemed a terrible failure of a preacher because he would have a very small following. A lot of those people would be following on social media, would be trolling him most of the time. He'd be a guy who'd be getting imprisoned a lot. He'd be deeply controversial with the existing church, all these things. And yet he was right where the Lord wanted him to be. And Sean Davis sent me a nice text after, the president's kind remarks. And he said, Larry, it doesn't matter, something to this effect. Forgive me, Sean, if I'm not quoting you exactly. I don't have it right in front of me. But he said to me, in effect, Larry, it doesn't matter how big the following is. It matters who's in your following. It matters who's actually following, who's paying attention to what you're saying. In this case, it was the president of the United States. So that's pretty cool. But the most important thing is that we're seeing the destruction of something that has been so evil, so wicked. And to me, it feels almost as great as Wilberforce, his campaign, which led to Parliament outlawing slavery in Britain. And then eventually, of course, the abolitionists brought that about in this particular country. I want to end by telling you that I think we're winning. Right now, I think we're winning. We've all worked very, very hard to bring this about. Millions of people, Americans and otherwise, have worked to bring this about. I don't think we can sit on our hands. I think we've got to work that much harder. I also think that it's very important, ladies and gentlemen, that we pray for J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, and for President Trump, because I think they're very marked men. I mean, they came into office, they picked up a stick, and they found the biggest hornet's nest they could find, and they just went over and started whacking it. They just said, we're going straight after it. We're going straight after the evil. Trump didn't do that the first time around. He's doing it this time. And if the left wanted to try to him the first time, you better believe they want to do it to him now more than ever, because what he is doing, I think, is 10 times worse than what they thought he was going to do. I think they thought that if he became president, it was going to be, Trump 2.0. It was going to be, 2016 to 2020 all over again. And it isn't anything like that. Nothing like that. And it's been fun to watch, but at the same time, I fear for the president of the United States, and I fear for the vice president. So I think we have to pray for them. Trump himself has spoken very openly of in efforts to try to do him in. We know we all saw it, what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. And there's been other attempts, and I think there will still be more. So let us pray for our president. Let us pray that the Lord give him wisdom. Let us pray that his policies are wise. So far, many of them have been, not all of them. Paula White, I mean, really? Paula White? But anyway, he's not a perfect man. None of us are. Let's pray for him. And let's go and win this battle. Let's go and win the culture. This has been another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton from Cairo, Egypt.